What happens when a multi-million-dollar corporation makes the mistake of a lifetime? It started on Flight 27B, from New York to London. A quiet, dignified, elderly woman, Ember Taylor, is sitting in the first-class seat her son bought her. A seat she is unceremoniously asked to give up for another passenger. The reason unspoken, but ugly. The flight attendants insist. They pressure her. They humiliate her. But they made one critical error. They had no idea that the quiet woman in seat 1A was the mother of Miguel Taylor, the CEO of Etherian Dynamics, and their airline's single most important corporate client. One phone call is about to unleash a storm of karma so swift and so complete it will not only cost them their jobs, it will change an entire company forever. The scent of premium leather and freshly brewed coffee filled the Global Wings Pantheon Lounge at JFK International Airport. For Ember Taylor, a woman of 72, whose life had been a testament to quiet dignity and hard work, it was a world away from her usual reality. A retired head nurse, her days were now filled with gardening book club meetings and the gentle rhythm of a life well lived in a modest but comfortable home in Queens. This, however, was different. This was a taste of her son's world. Her son, Miguel Taylor. Just thinking his name brought a universe of pride to her heart. Her boy, who had started with nothing but a brilliant mind and an unshakable work ethic, was now the CEO of Etherian Dynamics, a titan in the world of logistics and AI technology. He was featured in magazines she kept neatly stacked on her coffee table, Forbes Wired Time. But to her, he was just Miguel, the boy who still called her every single evening, no matter where in the world he was. "A trip to London, Ma," he had said, his voice warm over the phone. "First class. You've always wanted to see the Chelsea Flower Show. You gave me the world. Let me give you a little piece of it back." And so here she was, holding a boarding pass for seat 1A. She felt a little like an imposter, a sparrow amidst peacocks. The lounge was a hushed symphony of clinking glasses, muted laptop keys, and the low hum of conversations about stock options and summering in the Hamptons. Ember clutched her well-loved leather handbag, a gift from Miguel years ago, and took a small, contented sip of her orange juice. Across the room, a woman in a stark white pantsuit, with hair the color of champagne and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light with every flick of her wrist, was speaking loudly into her phone. "No, Bartholomew," I told them explicitly. "If the suite at the Savoy doesn't have a direct view of the Thames, then it's a non-starter." A non-starter. Some people just don't understand what premium means. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes, as if the weight of such incompetence was a cross she alone had to bear. This was Beatrice Harrington, wife of a minor hedge fund manager, a woman whose identity was welded to the concept of perceived status. Her gaze swept the room and briefly landed on Ember. It was a fleeting look, but it was thick with dismissal. Ember saw it and recognized it for what it was, the casual sizing up, the unspoken judgment. She'd seen that look before in her life, in different places from different faces. She met the woman's gaze for a second, offering a polite, neutral nod, before turning her attention back to the large window overlooking the tarmac. She would not let anyone spoil this day. Soon the boarding call for Flight 27B to London Heathrow echoed softly through the lounge, a priority call for Global Wings Pantheon and first-class passengers. Ember gathered her things, her heart giving a little flutter of excitement. As she approached the gate, she noticed the flight attendant collecting the boarding passes. Her name tag read Karen. She had a practiced plastic smile, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. When Ember handed her the pass for seat 1A, the smile faltered for a microsecond. A flicker of something surprise annoyance crossed her face before the professional mask was back in place. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," she said, her tone just a little too bright, a little too forced. Ember walked down the jet bridge, the anticipation building. She stepped onto the aircraft and was greeted by another attendant who pointed her toward the front cabin. "To your left, ma'am." And there it was, seat 1A. It wasn't just a seat, it was a pod. A self-contained suite of beige leather and polished chrome with its own minibar, a large screen, and enough legroom to host a small party. She carefully stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into the plush seat, running her hand over the smooth leather. She felt a wave of profound gratitude for her son. She took out her phone to text him a picture. "It's like a little apartment. Thank you, my sweet boy. I feel like a queen." His reply came back almost instantly. "You've always been a queen, Ma. Enjoy every second. I love you." She smiled, tucking her phone away as other passengers began to filter in. She accepted a glass of chilled champagne from a passing attendant, a man named David, the flight's purser. He was polite, efficient, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes either. A few minutes later, Beatrice Harrington, the woman from the lounge, boarded. She swept into the first-class cabin like a minor royal, her eyes scanning the seat numbers. She stopped dead when she saw Ember in 1A, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitted together in a frown. She checked her own boarding pass, then looked back at Ember, her expression one of pure disbelief. Ember, sensing the woman's stare, looked up. "Good morning," she said, her voice pleasant. Beatrice didn't return the greeting. Instead, she held up her boarding pass, which clearly read 3B. "You're in the wrong seat," she said, not as a question, but as a declaration. Ember remained calm. "I don't believe so. My pass is for 1A. "Well, there's obviously been a mistake." Beatrice huffed, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the purser, David, who was nearby. "This is a priority seat. It's usually reserved." The implication hung in the air, ugly and clear. Reserved for people like me. Not for people like you. "Ma'am," David said, stepping forward. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Beatrice snapped, gesturing towards Ember. "This woman is in the bulkhead seat. I was supposed to be here. My husband's assistant always books me in 1A or 1K. Always." Ember simply held out her boarding pass for David to see. He took it, his eyes flicking from the paper to Ember's face, then to the impatient, indignant face of Beatrice Harrington. A calculus of conflict avoidance and inherent bias was running through his mind. Appeasing the demanding, wealthy-looking white woman seemed like the path of least resistance. He murmured, looking at the pass. "Let me just check my manifest." He walked over to the galley, his steps betraying a sense of unease. He knew what the manifest would say, but he also knew what Beatrice Harrington wanted. He returned a moment later, accompanied by Karen, the gate agent, who had checked Ember in. Her plastic smile was back, but it looked more like a grimace. "Ma'am?" Karen began, addressing Ember with a tone one might use for a confused child. "There seems to have been a little system glitch. We are so terribly sorry. We do have you in first class, of course, but it appears your assigned seat is actually 7A. Ember's brow furrowed. "That can't be right. My boarding pass, which you just saw, says 1A. I selected this seat specifically with my son." "Yes, I understand," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. These computer systems, you know, they can be so tricky. Mrs. Harrington here is one of our most frequent flyers, and the system usually auto-assigns her this seat. It must have been a temporary error. It was a lie. A poorly constructed, transparent lie. Seat assignments, especially in premium cabins, were not whimsical suggestions. They were data points in a complex system. There was no glitch. There was only a choice, and they were choosing to appease the loud, demanding passenger at the expense of the quiet, unassuming one. "I don't understand," Ember said, her voice remaining steady, though a cold knot of humiliation was beginning to form in her stomach. "I have a valid ticket for this specific seat. I'm not moving." Beatrice scoffed audibly. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't make a scene. They're offering you another seat. Just take it." Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, we don't want to delay the flight. Everyone wants to get on their way. It would be a great help to us if you would just cooperate. Seat 7A is still a very lovely seat." The word cooperate felt like a threat. The phrase delay the flight was designed to paint her as the problem to turn the other passengers against her. It was a classic playbook of humiliation and pressure, and Ember recognized it instantly. She had seen it used on vulnerable patients by arrogant doctors. She had seen it in countless other small, painful moments throughout her life. Her quiet dignity was her shield, but it was being chipped away with every condescending word. She felt the eyes of the other first-class passengers on her. Some looked away embarrassed. Others watched with detached curiosity, as if she were a character in a play. No one spoke up. "It's not about the seat being lovely," Ember said, her voice now edged with a steel that surprised them. "It's about the principle. This is my assigned seat. I was here first. I have done nothing wrong." Karen's smile vanished completely. Her patience, thin as it was, had snapped. "Ma'am," she said, her voice now cold and firm, "we are the flight crew. We have the authority to assign seating as needed for the operational security and balance of the aircraft. I am telling you that your seat is 7A. Now are you going to move, or will I have to get the captain involved?" The threat was no longer veiled. It was raw and public. Humiliation washed over Ember. She was a 72-year-old woman, a guest on a flight her son had paid thousands of dollars for, and she was being threatened and shamed in front of a cabin full of strangers, all because she had the audacity to occupy a space someone else felt entitled to. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached into her handbag for her phone. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. She would not win this battle. They had all the power. They had already decided she was worth less than the other woman. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll move." As she stood up to collect her things, her eyes met Beatrice Harrington's. There was a smug, triumphant smirk on the woman's face. It was the look of someone who had just confirmed her own superiority. That smirk was the final cut. Ember paused, her phone in her hand. She looked at Karen, at David, and at the smirking Beatrice. They thought they had won. They thought the matter was settled. They had no idea what was coming. "Before I move," Ember said, her voice suddenly clear and steady again, "I need to make one quick phone call. It won't take a moment." Karen sighed, annoyed. "Make it quick. We're already behind schedule because of this." Ember nodded. She pressed the first number on her favorites list. The photo of her smiling son appeared on the screen. She pressed the call button. He would be in a meeting. He was always in a meeting. But he had made her a promise long ago. "No matter what, Ma, I will always pick up." The phone rang once, twice, and then his voice came through calm and clear. "Hey, Ma. Everything okay?" Ember took a deep breath. "Miguel," she began, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have a bit of a problem on the plane." 1,500 feet up in a mid-town Manhattan skyscraper, Miguel Taylor sat at the head of a glass-walled boardroom. The view stretched out over the steel and concrete canyons of the city, a kingdom he had in many ways conquered. On the table before him lay the schematics for Etherian Dynamics' new intercontinental drone delivery system, a project worth $9 billion. Around him sat his board of directors, men and women who managed empires of their own, all of them focused intently on his every word. "The beta phase stress tests exceeded our projections by 12%. Miguel was saying, his voice calm and authoritative. "The proprietary navigation AI, developed by Dr. Aris's team in Zurich, has proven not just stable, but adaptive. We are on track for a Q4 rollout, which will place us 3 years ahead of our nearest competitor." And his phone, resting face down on the polished table, vibrated silently. Normally, he would ignore it. In these meetings, the world outside this room ceased to exist. But he had set a specific haptic pattern for one number: his mother's. It was a short, insistent buzz, a signal they had arranged for emergencies. He didn't break stride, his eyes still scanning the faces of his board. "Which brings me to the revised revenue forecast from Ms. Chen's office." He gestured to his CFO. As she began to speak, Miguel casually picked up his phone. He saw the photo of his mother on the screen. His heart tightened. She never ever called him during market hours unless it was important. He held up a single calming hand, and the CFO paused mid-sentence. The entire room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's climate control. "Forgive me, everyone," Miguel said, his tone unwavering. "I need to take this." He didn't leave the room. Leaving would signal panic. He simply swiped to answer his thumb, moving with deliberate slowness. He was the eye of the hurricane, a point of absolute stillness around which everything else revolved. "Hey, Ma. Everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft. A stark contrast to the corporate titan he had been moments before. He listened. He didn't speak for a full 60 seconds. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They watched as their CEO's expression underwent a subtle, terrifying transformation. The warmth in his eyes cooled, solidifying into something hard and dangerous, like black ice. His relaxed posture stiffened his shoulders, squaring as if bracing for a physical impact. The hand holding the phone was steady, but the knuckles were white. On the other end of the line, Ember's voice was shaky, laced with a humiliation that cut him deeper than any business failure ever could. "They said it was a system glitch, Miguel. A Mrs. Harrington wanted the seat. The flight attendant, her name is Karen, she told me I had to move or she would call the captain. They said I was delaying the flight. I'm so sorry to bother you with this. It's silly. I'll just move to the other seat." "No, Ma," Miguel said, his voice low and preternaturally calm. "You will not move. Not 1 inch. Stay right where you are. Are you in seat 1A right now?" "No, dear," I stood up. "The other lady, she's already put her bag down." A muscle in Miguel's jaw clenched. "I understand. Ma, do not get off the phone. Just hold on for me for 1 moment. I'm going to handle this." He pressed the hold button. He looked up at his board. "Sarah," he said, his gaze locking onto his chief operating officer, Sarah Jenkins, a formidable woman known for her ruthless efficiency. "I need you for a moment. Everyone else take a 15-minute recess." The board members, sensing the gravity of the situation, filed out of the room without a word. Sarah Jenkins walked over, her expression serious. "What's happened, Miguel?" "My mother is on Global Wings Flight 27B, JFK to Heathrow. She is in first-class seat 1A on a ticket purchased with the Ethereum corporate account. She is currently being harassed and publicly humiliated by the flight crew, who are attempting to force her to give up her seat for another passenger." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She knew how devoted Miguel was to his mother. An attack on Ember Taylor was an attack on Miguel himself. "They are citing a system glitch." Miguel continued, his voice like chipped flint. "The flight purser's name is David. The primary flight attendant instigating this is named Karen. I want you to call Robert Stillwell." Robert Stillwell was not the CEO of Global Wings Airlines. He was something far more important in this context, the executive vice president of global corporate accounts. He was the man who personally managed the Ethereum Dynamics account, a contract worth over $50 million a year in corporate travel. Robert Stillwell would take Sarah's call on the first ring, day or night. "What's the message?" Sarah asked, already pulling out her phone. "The message is this," Miguel said, spelling it out with cold precision. "The Ethereum Dynamics corporate account with Global Wings, all $52 million of it, is now under immediate and total review. Effective immediately, all future bookings are suspended. The reason is the unacceptable and discriminatory treatment of a guest traveling on our account, that guest being my mother. You will inform him that Flight 27B will not move a single inch from that gate until the captain of the aircraft personally comes to my mother's seat, apologizes for the behavior of his crew, and escorts her back to her rightful seat 1A. You will also inform him that the crew members involved, Karen and David, are to have no further contact with my mother for the duration of the flight. Is that clear?" "Crystal," Sarah said, her fingers already flying across the screen to find Stillwell's number. "One more thing. Sarah," Miguel added, his voice dropping even lower. "Tell him I want the names of the crew for a formal complaint. Not just them. The gate agent who checked her in, too. I want a full report on my desk by the time my mother lands in London." "Consider it done, Miguel," Sarah nodded, and stepped out into the hallway to make the call that would detonate a bomb in the executive offices of Global Wings. Miguel took his mother off hold. "Ma, I'm here." "Miguel, please don't make a fuss," Ember said, her voice small. "It's all right. I can sit in the back." "No, Ma," he said, his voice softening again, but with an undercurrent of unshakable resolve. "It's not all right. It is the opposite of all right. They disrespected you, which means they disrespected me. Now I want you to do something for me. Just stand there by the seat. Be calm. This will be resolved in less than 5 minutes." On the plane, Karen was tapping her foot impatiently. "Ma'am, are you finished?" "We really need to close the doors." Ember looked at her, holding the phone to her ear. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, as her son had told her to, a picture of quiet defiance. Beatrice Harrington had already settled into seat 1A, smugly sipping the champagne Ember had left behind. "For goodness sake," Beatrice huffed. "Security should remove people like this." Suddenly, a different sound pierced the cabin's low murmur. It was the sharp, distinctive chime of the cockpit's communication line from the ground. A hush fell over the crew. That line was rarely used once boarding was underway, unless it was an emergency. The purser David hurried towards the cockpit. A moment later, the cabin door, which had been about to close, was pushed open by a frantic-looking ground operations manager. He ran up the jet bridge and into the plane, heading straight for the cockpit, his face pale. From her position, Ember could see the frantic whispered conversation. She saw the captain, a silver-haired man with an authoritative air, suddenly look stricken. His eyes darted around the cabin until they landed on her, the quiet, elderly black woman standing silently by seat 1A. And then his eyes moved to Beatrice Harrington, currently occupying that seat. A look of dawning horror spread across his face. The storm had arrived. The captain unbuckled himself and emerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of controlled panic. He strode directly past Beatrice, past Karen, and straight to Ember. "Mrs. Taylor?" he asked, his voice strained but respectful. "Ember Taylor." Ember, still holding her phone, simply nodded. "Mrs. Taylor," the captain said, his voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "On behalf of Global Wings Airlines, and as the captain of this aircraft, I want to offer you my most sincere and profound apology for the inexcusable behavior of my crew. You have been treated unacceptably, and there is no excuse for it. Please allow me to escort you back to your seat." He turned to Beatrice Harrington, his expression now glacial. "Ma'am, you are in the wrong seat. Please return to your assigned seat 3B immediately." The cabin was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Every eye was on them. Karen's face had drained of all color. David, the purser, looked like he was about to be sick. Beatrice Harrington stared, mouth agape, her face a comical mixture of shock and fury. "What?" she stammered. "But they said there was a glitch." "There was no glitch, madame," the captain said, his voice booming with authority. "There was a failure of service and a failure of basic human decency on the part of my staff. Now move. Now." But Ember Taylor, listening to her son's calm voice in her ear, did something no one expected. She looked at the captain at the proffered seat, at the humiliated faces of the crew, and the furious face of Beatrice Harrington. And then she spoke, her voice clear and strong. "No, thank you, Captain," she said, making her decision in that instant. "I don't think I will." The captain stared at Ember, momentarily speechless. His orders from the highest levels of corporate had been unequivocal. "Fix it. Appease the passenger. Do not lose the Ethereum account." He had followed his script. He had apologized, validated her, and publicly chastised the other passenger. In his mind, the problem was solved. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Taylor," he stammered. "You heard me." "Captain." Ember said, her composure absolute. In her ear, Miguel's voice was a reassuring murmur. "Whatever you want to do, Ma, I support you 100%. That was all the strength she needed. "You are very kind to apologize, but an apology doesn't erase the humiliation. Your crew made it very clear that they did not think I belonged here. They made me feel like a nuisance, like a second-class citizen. They did this in front of all these people." She made a small, graceful gesture to the rest of the cabin. "Why would I want to spend the next 7 hours in the care of a crew that holds me in such contempt? I wouldn't feel comfortable. I wouldn't feel safe." Every word was delivered without malice, but with the firm, unassailable weight of truth. It was no longer about a seat. It was about dignity. Karen, the flight attendant, looked as if she had seen a ghost. Her career was flashing before her eyes. She started to babble. "Ma'am, please, it was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to—" "You were trying to placate a loud, entitled passenger at my expense," Ember finished for her, her gaze unwavering. "You made a judgment call based on what you saw, and you judged wrongly." She then looked at Beatrice Harrington, who was now standing awkwardly in the aisle, clutching her purse, her face burning with a mixture of rage and shame. "And you, madam, should learn that status is not something you demand. It is something you earn through your conduct. Your conduct today has been appalling." Beatrice sputtered. "Well, I never—" "No," Ember said calmly. "I imagine you haven't. Not like this." She turned back to the captain. "So no, Captain. I will not be taking my seat. I will not be flying on Flight 27B today. I would like to deplane, please. I will make my own arrangements." The captain's blood ran cold. This was a catastrophic escalation. A dissatisfied customer was one thing. A dissatisfied customer who was the mother of their most important client, who was now so disgusted she was refusing to fly at all, was a 5-alarm corporate fire. The flight was already delayed. Deplaning a passenger and her luggage would cause a further massive delay. The knock-on effects would be enormous. "Mrs. Taylor, please reconsider," he pleaded, his professional demeanor cracking under the immense pressure. "We will ensure you have the most pleasant flight possible. I will personally see to your every need." Ember gave him a small, sad smile. "The time for that has passed, Captain. My decision is made. I would like my carry-on bag, please." Defeated, the captain nodded numbly. He gestured to a stone-faced David the purser, who moved as if in a trance to the overhead bin and retrieved Ember's bag. He handed it to her, without meeting her eyes. Ember took her bag and, with her head held high, turned to walk down the aisle. The other passengers watched her, their silence a mixture of awe and pity. She had stood up to the system and won, but at the cost of her own journey. As she passed seat 3B, Beatrice Harrington's actual seat, she paused for a moment and then continued toward the open door of the aircraft. On the phone, Miguel asked, "Are you off the plane, Ma?" "Yes, my dear. I'm on the jet bridge." "Good." Miguel set his voice a low, dangerous hum. "Sarah is still on the line with Global Wings. I'm going to have a car waiting for you at the curb in 10 minutes. It will take you to Teterboro Airport. I'm chartering a plane for you. It will take you directly to London. You will be more comfortable and you will get there faster. Your vacation is not cancelled, Ma. It's just getting an upgrade." Tears welled in Ember's eyes, not from sadness or humiliation anymore, but from an overwhelming love for her son. He hadn't just stood up for her. He had wrapped her in a cocoon of power and protection, so profound that the ugliness she had just experienced seemed to shrink into insignificance. "Oh, Miguel," she whispered. That's too much." "Nothing is too much for you, Ma," he replied. "Now go wait for the car. I have some business to finish here." He hung up. Miguel Taylor stood up from the boardroom table. Sarah Jenkins had just walked back, in her face grim. "Stillwell is in full meltdown mode," she reported. "He's put their CEO James Atherton on the line for you. He's begging to talk to you." "Put him on the speaker." Miguel said, his voice flat. A panicked, aristocratic voice filled the boardroom. "Miguel James Atherton here. My God, I just heard. I cannot express how horrified and deeply sorry I am. This is not who we are at Global Wings. It's an isolated incident with a rogue crew, and I can assure you they will be dealt with in the severest terms possible." Miguel cut him off. "James," he said, his voice so cold it could have frozen mercury. Stop talking. You don't know the first thing about what your company is because you're sitting in a corner office and I'm the one whose 72-year-old mother was just bullied and humiliated by your staff." "Miguel, Did you know James?" Miguel continued, walking over to the window and looking down at the city. "That my mother was a head nurse for 40 years. She worked double shifts in the emergency room to pay for my first computer. She has dealt with life and death with true crisis. She possesses more grace and dignity in her little finger than your entire flight crew and that passenger combined. And your company, your employees, made her feel small. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. My mother has deplaned. I am putting her on a private jet because she no longer feels safe with your airline. Your staff did that. Your culture did that. We will fire them, Miguel. Atherton said, his voice desperate. Today I'll have their termination letters drafted within the hour. Firing them is a start, James. It's a reactive measure. It's a press release. It's not a solution, Miguel retorted. The problem is deeper. Your flight attendant, Karen Miller, and your purser, David Chen, didn't just invent this behavior. They felt empowered to do it. They saw an elderly black woman and a loud, seemingly affluent white woman, and they made a calculation. They calculated that my mother's dignity was disposable. They felt safe in that calculation. You need to ask yourself why they felt so safe. The answer is your corporate culture. What do you want, Miguel? Atherton asked, his voice now subdued, defeated. The Ethereon account. It's vital to us. I know it is, Miguel said. Here's what's going to happen. You are, of course, going to fire the individuals involved. Not just the two on the plane, but the gate agent who was complicit. I want their names and confirmation of termination by end of day. But that's just housekeeping. He took a breath. Second, you are going to lose the Ethereum account. For 1 year, $52 million. You need to feel the financial consequences of your company's culture. It needs to be in your quarterly report. It needs to be a question your shareholders ask you. A strangled gasp came from the speakerphone. After that year, Miguel continued, we may, and I stress may, consider reinstating it, but only if you implement a new mandatory and comprehensive sensitivity and de-escalation training program company-wide, from baggage handlers to the C-suite. And that program will be designed and implemented by a third-party consultancy firm, a firm of my choosing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The CEO of Global Wings was processing the brutal surgical precision of the consequences. This wasn't just punishment. This was a forced restructuring of his company's soul, dictated by a man he had catastrophically wronged. And finally, James, Miguel said, delivering the killing blow. I want a public apology, not a vague, we are sorry for any inconvenience statement. I want a press release from your office that explicitly details the events of Flight 27B. It will state that a passenger was targeted and harassed by your crew based on perceived racial and class bias, that the airline finds this unacceptable, and it will outline the concrete steps you are taking to ensure it never happens again. You will not name my mother, but you will make the truth of the situation crystal clear. Miguel, that would be devastating for our brand. Your brand is already devastated, James, Miguel replied icily. You just don't know it yet. You have until 5 p.m. today to agree to these terms. If you don't, Sarah will be releasing a statement of her own to the press detailing why Ethereum Dynamics, effective immediately, has severed all ties with Global Wings. Believe me, the story of why a top tech CEO pulled a $50 million account will be far more damaging to your brand than a controlled, honest apology. The choice is yours. He walked back to the table and ended the call, plunging the boardroom back into silence. Sarah Jenkins looked at him, a glint of deep respect in her eyes. That was thorough. Miguel finally allowed a flicker of emotion to cross his face. It was a deep, weary sadness. She just wanted to see the flowers, Sarah, he said, quietly. They couldn't even give her that. Back at JFK, Flight 27B was finally mercifully pushing back from the gate, nearly 2 hours delayed. Beatrice Harrington sat in her original seat, 3B, stewing in a silent, impotent fury. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was thick with tension. Karen and David moved about their duties like automatons, their faces ashen, avoiding eye contact with everyone. They knew they were flying on borrowed time. The real karma hadn't even begun to hit them yet. As Ember Taylor was being ushered into the hushed, opulent cabin of a Gulfstream G650 at a private airfield in New Jersey, the fallout from her brief traumatic encounter on Flight 27B was just beginning to metastasize. Karma Miguel Taylor believed wasn't just a mystical force, it was a series of well-placed, logical consequences delivered without emotion. The first consequence was felt by Beatrice Harrington. She had gotten what she wanted for a few glorious, smug minutes. Now she was the pariah of the first-class cabin. The passenger in 2A, a mild-mannered man who had silently witnessed the whole exchange, had turned out to be Peter Maxwell, a notable columnist for The Atlantic. He hadn't said a word, but he had observed everything, his mind carefully cataloguing the dialogue. The expressions, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement. His next column, tentatively titled "The Audacity of Privilege at 30,000 feet," was already writing itself in his head. Beatrice, oblivious to this, was trying to salvage her shattered ego. She attempted to engage the man across the aisle in conversation. "Can you believe the nerve of some people delaying an entire flight like that?" The man, a silver-haired investment banker, simply looked at her. His expression one of profound distaste. "Ma'am," he said coolly, "I believe we all saw what happened. Perhaps it is best we have a quiet flight." He then pointedly put on a pair of noise-cancelling headphones, turning his back to her. Rebuffed and radiating hostility, Beatrice retreated into a sulky silence for the remainder of the 7-hour flight. The second, more immediate consequence was for the crew. Halfway across the Atlantic, the captain received another message from corporate via the ACAR's system. It was blunt and brutal. Upon arrival, LHR-FAs Miller and Chen are to report immediately to station manager. Do not work. Return flight. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from premises. Details to follow. The captain passed the printed message to David the purser. David read it, his face crumbling. He showed it to Karen, who was preparing the meal service. She stared at the paper, her hands starting to shake so violently she had to set down the tongs she was holding. The professional mask, the condescending smile, the air of authority. It all dissolved, revealing a terrified woman who had just flown her career straight into a mountain. They had to complete the flight. They had to continue serving meals, offering drinks, and smiling at the very passengers who had witnessed their downfall. It was a special kind of hell, a 7-hour wake for their own careers. Every polite request for a pillow or a glass of water felt like another spade of dirt on their professional graves. They had made a calculation, and they had gotten the math catastrophically wrong. They had bet on Ember Taylor being a nobody. They didn't realize she was the mother of the man who held the purse strings to their entire world. Meanwhile, the story was beginning to leak. Not from Miguel or his company. He was holding his fire, waiting for Global Wings' CEO to capitulate. It leaked from the other passengers. A tech blogger in premium economy who had heard the commotion and seen Ember deplane posted a thread on X, formerly Twitter. "Wild scenes on my Global Wings flight to London. They tried to bully an elderly black woman out of her paid-for first-class seat for another passenger. She stood her ground, words were exchanged, and then she just got off the plane. Now we're delayed 2 HRs. Anyone know what happened? Ashram Flight 27B, not Global Wings. The post began to pick up steam. People started replying, sharing their own horror stories with the airline. The hashtag Global Wings started trending for all the wrong reasons. By the time Flight 27B landed at Heathrow, a small but growing PR crisis was already brewing. For Ember, the contrast was dizzying. Her private jet was a sanctuary of peace. The 2-person crew treated her with a gentle, unobtrusive reverence that felt like a healing balm. They called her Mrs. Taylor, brought her tea and a warm blanket, and told her to let them know if she needed anything at all. She ate a light, delicious meal, watched the clouds drift by from her enormous window, and fell into a peaceful sleep. She landed at London Luton Airport's private terminal an hour before the chaotic arrival of Flight 27B at Heathrow. A black car was waiting on the tarmac. The driver, a kind man named Arthur, had a bouquet of her favorite flowers, freesias, waiting for her on the back seat. A note was tucked inside. "Ma, welcome to London. The Chelsea Flower Show is waiting. I've handled everything. Forget about what happened and have the trip of a lifetime. I love you more than words can say. M." Her humiliation was already a distant memory, replaced by the fierce, protective love of her son. This, she knew, was his real success. Not the company, not the money, but his heart. Back in New York, the 5 p.m. deadline Miguel had given James Atherton was approaching. Atherton had spent the afternoon in frantic meetings with his legal team and PR department. They had run the numbers. Losing the Ethereum account would be a $52 million hole in their revenue, a fact they would have to disclose to shareholders, which would inevitably crater their stock price. A public statement from Miguel Taylor about why he pulled the account would be infinitely worse, a reputational nuke from which they might never recover. At 4:47 p.m., Miguel's phone rang. It was Atherton. "Miguel," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We agree to your terms, all of them." "A wise decision, James," Miguel said coolly. "Send me the termination confirmations and the draft of the public apology for my review. My consultancy firm recommendation for the new training program will be on your desk in the morning." He hung up. The final piece of karma was reserved for Beatrice Harrington. She disembarked at Heathrow, feeling haggard and furious, intent on writing a scathing complaint about the terrible service and the unruly passenger who delayed the flight. As she cleared customs, her phone buzzed with a notification. A friend had tagged her in a post on Instagram. It was a screenshot of the tech blogger's viral tweet about Flight 27B. Underneath in the comments, someone had replied, "I think the other passenger was Beatrice Harrington, wife of that Harrington Capital guy. Always thought she was a piece of work." Her blood turned to ice. She scrolled frantically. Her name was starting to appear in other replies. Peter Maxwell's column wouldn't be out for another day, but in the echo chamber of social media, the story was already taking shape, and she was being cast as the villain. Her husband, Richard Harrington, prided himself on maintaining a low, respectable profile. Their social standing was built on a carefully constructed facade of old money elegance, a facade she had just shattered with her public display of petulance. When she arrived at the Savoy, her mood was thunderous. The suite, of course, had a perfect view of the Thames, but she couldn't enjoy it. Her phone was now buzzing incessantly with alerts. The story was spreading. Someone had found her public social media profiles and was linking them to the threads. Comments started appearing on her own photos of galas and charity events. Is this the woman who tried to steal an old lady's seat? Entitlement has a face, and it's filtered. Hat Beatrice Harrington, Hashmard Flight 27B. The nightmare had begun, but the hardest karma was yet to come. The story wasn't just about a rude passenger anymore. It was about to become a national conversation, and she, Karen Miller, and David Chen were about to become unwilling poster children for a much larger problem. Their names and faces, once protected by corporate anonymity, were about to be thrust into the harsh, unforgiving light of a media firestorm. The next morning, two things happened simultaneously that sealed the fate of everyone involved. First, Global Wings Airlines, as promised, released their public statement. It was drafted with the reluctant precision of a hostage reading their captor's demands. But it met every one of Miguel's terms. Global Wings is deeply committed to providing a safe and respectful environment for all our passengers. We have recently fallen egregiously short of this standard. On Flight 27B from New York to London on July 15th, a passenger was subjected to unacceptable and discriminatory treatment by our crew, who attempted to improperly remove her from her assigned seat at the behest of another passenger. This behavior is not reflective of our values, and we are taking immediate and decisive action. The crew members involved have been terminated. Furthermore, we are initiating a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of our company culture and implementing a new mandatory sensitivity and de-escalation training program for all employees to be overseen by an independent third-party expert. We have personally extended our most profound apologies to the affected passenger. We can and must do better. It was a bombshell. The statement didn't just apologize, it admitted fault in stunningly specific terms. It confirmed the firings and promised systemic change. The financial world took immediate notice. By noon, Global Wings stock, GWAL, had dropped 9%. The second event was the publication of Peter Maxwell's column in The Atlantic. Titled The Banality of Injustice, it was a masterful first-person account of the entire incident. He didn't name Ember, referring to her only as a woman of quiet grace, but he named everyone else. He named Karen Miller and David Chen, describing their calculated condescension. And he named Beatrice Harrington, painting a brutal portrait of her shrill, unearned entitlement. The combination of the airline's official confession and a vivid, damning eyewitness account from a respected journalist turned a trending topic into a national news story. The names were now public record. For Karen Miller and David Chen, the consequences were swift and absolute. Their terminations were not just for poor customer service. They were for gross misconduct that caused direct financial and reputational harm to the company. This was noted in their records, effectively blacklisting them from any other major airline. Karen, who had built her identity on the perceived glamour of being a senior international flight attendant, found herself unemployable in the only field she knew. She had to sell her condo and move in with her sister, her life dismantled by one terrible decision. David Chen, who had been hoping for a promotion to station manager, saw his 2-decade career evaporate. He was consumed by guilt, not just for his job, but for his cowardice in failing to do the right thing. The karma for Beatrice Harrington was of a different, more social and insidious nature. Her name was now inextricably linked with public disgrace. The New York social circles she so desperately wanted to conquer turned their backs on her. Invitations to charity galas dried up. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her husband, Richard Harrington, whose business relied on a reputation for quiet competence and integrity, was livid. His wife's public spectacle had brought unwanted scrutiny to his firm, and made him a subject of ridicule among his peers. Their marriage, already strained by her insecurities, began to crumble under the weight of her newfound infamy. She had craved status, and in a way she had achieved it. She was famous for being a monster. But the story didn't end with punishment. It ended with change. Miguel Taylor made good on his promise. He contracted a leading DEI diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm, the Anderson Group, renowned for its no-nonsense effective programs. They descended upon Global Wing's corporate headquarters with a mandate for radical change. The training wasn't the usual box-ticking HR exercise. It was intense, immersive, and uncomfortable. It forced pilots, executives, and flight attendants to confront their own unconscious biases through rigorous role-playing and frank discussions. The story of Flight 27B became a central case study in their training manual, a textbook example of how a series of small, biased decisions could snowball into a multi-million-dollar corporate disaster. The airline, humbled and financially wounded, had no choice but to embrace it. Over the next year, slowly but surely the culture began to shift. In London, Ember Taylor was having the time of her life. She visited the Chelsea Flower Show not once, but 3 times. She explored the British Museum, had tea at the Ritz, and saw 2 plays in the West End. Miguel flew out and joined her for the last few days of her trip. They were walking through Hyde Park on a sunny afternoon when his phone buzzed. It was a news alert. A major business journal had just published a deep-dive article titled "The Ethereum Effect: How One CEO's Stand Forced an Airline to Change." The piece detailed the training programs and cultural shifts at Global Wings, framing Miguel's actions not as revenge, but as a powerful act of corporate responsibility. Ember saw him reading the screen. "Is everything all right, dear?" Miguel smiled and put his phone away. He put his arm around his mother's shoulders. "Everything is perfect, Ma." He looked at her, his expression full of a love that was deeper than any ocean. "You know," he said, "when you stood up on that plane and said no, you did more than just get off a flight. You started something. You forced a company to look in the mirror. You being you, Ma, that changed the world a little bit." Ember leaned her head on his shoulder, looking at the vibrant flowers blooming all around them. She thought of the cold humiliation on the plane and how it had been transformed into this warm, beautiful moment. It hadn't been a silly incident. It had been a test, and by simply refusing to accept disrespect, by holding on to her own worth, she had passed it. "Well," she said with a soft smile, "sometimes you have to tend your own garden first, but it's nice when the seeds you plant grow somewhere else, too." They continued their walk, a mother and son, who in their own ways had reminded the world that the truest form of power isn't about the seat you occupy, but about the dignity you refuse to surrender. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a fired flight crew or a passenger who got her comeuppance. It was a story about the hidden power of dignity and the real-world consequences of our choices. Ember Taylor wasn't a CEO or a celebrity. She was a mother, a retired nurse, whose quiet strength sparked a revolution in a billion-dollar company. Miguel Taylor didn't just use his power for revenge. He used it to enforce accountability and demand meaningful, lasting change. This story is a powerful reminder that every one of us has a right to be treated with respect, regardless of our age, our race, or the seat we're sitting in. It shows that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is a simple, dignified no. What did you think of the swift karma in this story? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone stood up against injustice and won? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories of drama, karma, and ultimate justice. Thank you for listening.